You have clearly been disgusted, based on your Twitter feed for weeks, with the unfounded voter fraud claims and conspiracy theories being pushed by the president. Was the final straw last week when a majority of your colleagues, House Republicans, signed on to that baseless Texas lawsuit that would have disenfranchised all of the voters of your home state of Michigan, as well as Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia?
Well, Jake, I believe that any candidate has the ability to request a recount, to go through legal processes if they think there's some basis that the vote's not reasonable or some founded conspiracy concerns or concern about fraud. But we've gone through the process. And as I saw that amicus brief, as well as the discussions over the weekend in the national media, it became clear to me that I could no longer be associated with the Republican Party, that leadership does not stand up and say, the process, the election is over. It's over today. And then I saw the president tweet out that it's not over till January 20. Somehow he's going to continue to combat this. The people have voted. As I say in my letter, I voted for Donald Trump. I supported the administration policies 95, 96% of the time the last two terms. I've been active in the National State Party. But this party has to stand up for democracy first, for our Constitution first, and not political considerations, not protect a candidate, not simply for raw political power. And that's what I feel is going on, and I've had enough.
And for people who don't know, as you know, you've been with President Trump 95, 96% of the time. You voted for him in 2016, 2020. You're a member of the Conservative Republican Study Group in the House. You whipped votes for Republicans in Congress. You raised money for Republican candidates. And now you're going to be an independent, because your letter, as I noticed, it CCs the clerk of the House.
Yes.
Tell us what it feels like in this moment, and how are you going to respond to critics who attack you as, I mean, they're going to call you a rhino, even though obviously you're a very conservative Republican.
Well, the definition of rhino has changed in the last couple of years, hasn't it, Jake? Rhino now is if you don't follow whatever the president decides is the theme of the day or the week or the month. I'm a conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative. I believe in small government. How am I going to respond? Frankly, I'm not. I'm going to stand on my principles. I've not spoken with hardly any of them. I've spoken with one other member who believes there are concerns with some states or others have done. But I didn't believe the brief was appropriate or valid. I believe the lawsuit, I'm trying to think of a polite term for it.
You don't have to be polite.
It was ridiculous. What it says is if Texas thinks that other states have administered their election laws in a manner they don't like, that they can overturn those votes, that they can overturn those states. We're a republic of states. States have the ability to determine their election laws. And in fact, in the concern about Michigan, a federal judge ruled that the Secretary of State could send out absentee ballot applications. They did not send out ballots. They sent out applications to everyone if they wanted to get a ballot given the COVID-19. There's nothing in the law that precludes that. However, apparently Texas didn't like it. Okay. I wasn't aware that we had to respond to Texas whenever we had an election in Michigan or in the other state.
This is Congressman Paul Mitchell announcing that he'd be leaving the Republican Party and becoming an independent over Trump's effort to undo the results of a free and fair election. He took to Twitter where he posted a copy of the letter he'd sent to both Republican Chair Ronna Romney McDaniel as well as Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, where he wrote, quote, "The president and his legal team have failed to provide substantive evidence of fraud or administrative failure on a scale large enough to impact the outcome of the election." He went on to say, quote, "It is unacceptable for political candidates to treat our election system as though we are a third world nation and incite distrust of something so basic as the sanctity of our vote. Further, it is unacceptable for the president to attack the Supreme Court of the United States because its judges, both liberal and conservative, did not rule with his side or that the court failed him. It was our founding fathers' objective to insulate the Supreme Court from such blatant political motivation. If Republican leaders collectively sit back and tolerate unfounded conspiracy theories and stop the steal rallies without speaking out for our electoral process, which the DHS said was the most secure in American history, our nation will be damaged. I've spoken out clearly and forcefully in opposition to these messages. However, with the leadership of the Republican Party and our Republican conference in the House actively participating in at least some of these efforts, I fear long-term harm to our democracy." Now, a couple of things are true at once. First, it's true that Mitchell is retiring at the end of this term, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that it would be nice if every time a Republican spoke out against Trump, it wasn't because he didn't already have one foot out the door. It's a testament to how collectively spineless the GOP is that they're not willing to take a stand against an avowed despot and still face their voters. I guess being a constitutionalist is way easier as a platitude than in practice. But what's also true is that, retiring or not, this is what we need to see from the right. You don't have to agree with their political philosophies, and I don't, but the fact is that unless Republicans speak out against Trump and try to reclaim their party from Trumpism, then it will only continue to veer off this cliff. It's not Democrats criticizing Trump that are going to change anything. It's not independents, it's not foreign leaders or the Dalai Lama or the Pope. It is Republicans. The onus is on them. So you might disagree with their politics with every fiber of your being, but at the very least, this kind of action should be applauded. And if this kind of action was replicated by the rest of the party, it would bode a hell of a lot better for the future of our democracy. And yet the reason this is so newsworthy is that not only won't Republicans do what Paul Mitchell has done, but they'll actually do the opposite. The fact that 126 House Republicans actually signed onto a lawsuit seeking to invalidate the results of an election, all because they weren't happy with the results, goes to show that they're not even trying to hide their disdain for democracy. This was a lawsuit that even a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court, including 3 justices that Trump himself appointed, refused to even hear. And yet still the majority of House Republicans fell over themselves to hang this albatross around their necks. That's how committed to the destruction of this country they are. And bear in mind, there's no legitimate basis to even defend having done so. The Trump campaign and its allies have brought 59 cases forward, and they quite literally lost 58 of them. The only win was shortening a cure deadline from 9 to 6 days. That's it. Every other case was a complete and total repudiation of Trump's bogus fraud claims, his bogus procedural claims, his bogus dead people voting and machine switching votes and observers being blocked from observing, and rigged voting systems vendors claims. Even now, still, lawyers representing Trump are going on Twitter and suggesting that the whole world was involved in an elaborate conspiracy to steal the election from Trump. Lin Wood tweeted, quote, "CCP and thousands of US citizens worked together to try to steal 2020 election at top of ticket and selected down ballot races. Serbia, Canada, Venezuela, Cuba, CIA, George Soros, Bill Gates, Biden, Clinton Foundation, and many national, state, and local officials from both parties involved." There is not enough tinfoil in the world. And yet the idea that Hugo Chavez, who's been dead for the better part of a decade, interfered in our election is still more likely than the idea that there was widespread fraud, which has been thoroughly debunked by members of both parties, election officials, investigators, and judges. And so the only reason we continue to hear this from the right is because it's not actually about discovering the truth, it's about spreading lies. The disinformation campaign is the point. And with these lies spreading like wildfire among Republicans, the only way to stop it is if people like Paul Mitchell speak out. Any Republicans who continue to stay silent, knowing that this is what their colleagues are trafficking in, are complicit in the lies. So the GOP has a decision to make as their party continues to descend down the path of destruction. And that is to watch it fall off a cliff or stand up and actually abide by the oath they took to defend the Constitution. If you like this video, please check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I take a deep dive into the week's most important stories and interview major players in politics, including Kamala Harris, Katie Porter, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Eric Swalwell, Mary Trump, Al Franken, Cory Booker, and many, many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.